the Beef and Lamb Central Otago Farming for Profit Grass to Gold webinar series. The overarching theme of this series is around converting feed efficiently into profit and providing practical and strategic advice to ensure that you're set up for a successful lamb and beef finishing season next season. So we're aiming to provide information and ideas that you can implement in the next season, as well as insights on technologies to consider in the future. So the structure of the webinar series is that each Monday evening for the next 3 weeks, we'll run a webinar with a different topic and guest speaker. So tonight our focus is going to be on beef finishing systems, and I'll intro our speakers in a minute. Next Monday we'll explore wearable tech, comparing 2 different providers and exploring current and future applications for these products. And then the following Monday, the 30th of June, we're going to look at lamb finishing systems, practical tips and advice from a local farm consultant. Just a couple of notes before we get started. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar as you think of them. So to do this, just hover your mouse over the screen, and down the bottom you'll see a chat box. If you open up the chat box, you can type into the chat box any questions that you've got, and I'll collate those and put them to Bob at the end of the webinar. And also just make sure you've got your camera and mic turned off during the session. On to tonight's webinar. So tonight we're all about beef finishing, and who better to talk to us about this than renowned beef consultant Bob Thomson. Bob brings 50 years of experience working alongside farmers. He initially started out as a MAF advisor, and then latterly has worked for AgFirst as an agribusiness consultant. And to say Bob is passionate about beef is a bit of an understatement. He lives and breathes this stuff, and over the years he's worked with countless farmers to fine-tune their systems, improve efficiency and unlock the full potential of their beef enterprises. And he's seen what works and what doesn't, and he's got a great way of making technical stuff practical and easy to apply on farm. So we're very fortunate to have Bob tonight to share his insights and offer us some practical advice and strategies, and also to answer your questions. Also joining Bob tonight is Ben Trotter. You'll probably know him locally, formerly as an agronomist and now farming in the Upper Clutha. He's going to provide a local context to tonight's discussion. But that's all from me. I'll leave it to you, Bob, to take it away.
Good evening, and thanks for the opportunity to share some of the excitement around beef systemisation. Yes, as you pointed out, it's been 50 years, which is quite a long time, and I celebrated that milestone just a couple of months ago. But, you know, back when I started, we used to talk a lot about the 3 big S's, and that related to the core elements to really make a farm go. And those were subdivision, stock policy, which embraced the associated management, and soil fertility. Back in the day, soil fertility was referred to as super, and the guts of that was that if you have got subdivision, then you've got management choice. And you know, not every stock policy is as good as the next, and there are some systems that you need to apply within that. Back in the day, we call it control grazing systems, and this was around rotational grazing, when we came to understand that rotations are a really good way of increasing average pasture cover and therefore increasing pasture growth. I mean, at the base of that is that you know, a leaf of pasture is like a solar panel, and the more of those you can offer up to the sun, the more energy you can trap and the more grass you will grow. In fact, when we come to beef systemisation, we've found quite normally that we would get 20-25% more pasture growth just by attending to the grass grows grass phenomenon. And at the base of that, of course, is rotational length. So it sort of begs the question, what is beef systemisation? And that is how I'd like to headline this discussion. And I think we could say that it's an all pasture system by and large. So what we're saying here is that our pasture is the cheapest food on the planet when it comes to dealing with our animals, in this case beef cattle. But you know, especially in a cold climate, like your central Otago climate, you're going to have a bit of a war chest of supplements somewhere in the background for a couple of different reasons that we can talk about as we move through. I guess by way of actually, there's the fact that I've had the great pleasure of working with a lot of farmers and learning a lot along the journey over the years. But perhaps more associated with tonight and talking to you as Central Otago farmers, I've had over 5 years' experience on the Central Plateau. And interestingly, the pasture growth profile there is very similar to yours. And so we've had to come to grips with how we run a beef system, an all-grass beef system in such a harsh and tough environment there. So I guess that helps, gives me some of the credentials to help talk tonight, but also, of course, we've got Ben with us to add in that extra bit of South Island flavour. So the first thing is we made the point that we're talking about a pasture-based system, albeit backed up with a few supplements. It's basically we're talking about a dedicated land area to place a system on. And these may range, the actual systems may range in size from 5 to 20 hectares. We tend to use electric fencing because it is cost effective. We maybe have 1 or 2 electric wires. And we tend to use quite a lot of the Kiwi-Tech technology, which affords, springs in your fence line, fiberglass standards with a heck of a lot more quality and UV resistance and therefore life. So we use quite a bit of their technology generally. We tend to, when we're thinking about your environment, to be thinking about 20 permanent cells. And this enables us to think about, for winter, further subdividing those 20 cells. And this is more typically what we've done on the Central Plateau, North Island Central Plateau environment, where we've had each cell divided in 4 for winter. And so now we've got 20 permanent cells times 4, 80 cells. And then with a 2-day shift frequency, we have a 160-day winter rotation. Now, the calculation of your winter rotation length is, of course, directly related to your winter pasture growth. But the other important thing to remember is your pasture cover. And when we're talking about pasture cover and trying to run an all pasture system, we tend to see what you used to have as hay in the barn or silage in a stack represented in the pasture cover that we start the winter with. And my experience on the Central Plateau says that your winter, and when looking at your pasture growth profile, your winter starts on the 1st of May. Now, I'm happy to be questions in around this, and Ben will comment on this as we go through, I'm sure. But and is that a fair comment, Ben? So we would be thinking about establishing a pasture cover target for the 1st of May, yes?
Yeah, and you'd start planning that in February in
Way
this
back in February.
climate. Yeah.
Yep. So a bit of planning needs to go into it, because what we're effectively doing is putting what used to be our feed supplements stored up in a barn or in a stack. We have it represented in feed cover. And we have a saying that goes with our beef systemisation, that pasture cover or cover is king. And so we will talk quite a bit of that as we go along. So we tend to think about a pasture wedge, and so it has shape to it. So it has a big front and a not so big back to it. However, when we're talking about low winter pasture growth rates, it's not a big wedge, it's a relatively thin wedge, whereby we have pre-grazers that may be way up over 3,000, and post-grazers it'll go down to 1,100-1,200. A beef animal can only graze to 800. And so we tend to be thinking about farming down to maintenance or close to maintenance over winter, because one of the other really important things with beef systemisation is carrying as many cattle as we can over winter so that we can utilise as much of the spring growth as we can. I mean, you've already bought and paid for it. So the idea is to try and utilise them. Because we've got all these sticks and strings or cells around, 40 of them, you're not going to be driving in with a silage. You're not be making hay or silage out of your systems. So another little technique that we tend to use is, and particularly in the cold climate where you get such big springs in early summers, is that we will consider deferred grazing. So some of that surplus, instead of being harvested and made into hay or silage, we will have it represented in deferred grazing. And so this is quite a big chunk of cover that we can utilise when pasture supply is less than feed demand. And in those months like February, March and April, we will use that deferred grazing pasture to help build covers on the rest of the system area. So that's sort of in essence how they work. So big covers as you go into winter, and we're going to mine that cover over winter such that when we get through to the spring, we're getting down to relatively low covers. They might only be like averaging 1,500, a number like that, and sometimes less, depending on the season. And we'll be looking to speed up those rotations as quickly as we can. And looking at your pasture curve again, you'll be thinking about that in early September, about when am I going to speed up. You'll be walking ahead of the cattle in the system and thinking, where am I going to be in 30 days? What's the pasture cover here now? What's the pasture growth rate? What's the cover going to look like? And those sorts of processes you'll use to determine when you're going to speed up. So where have we got to here? So we're talking about these covers, so it's quite different. I guess the thing to say too is that because those covers are so high, you end up with pasture quality being relatively low, because you obviously have very high dry matter percentages and lower pasture, digestion rates. So here we go, we've got lower pasture, but we are feeding them levels which are appropriate to their demand, and we can calculate that quite easily. And we're not expecting to get big winter live weight gains when we're on an all pasture system. In fact, as I said, we're trying to carry as many cattle as we can, and we're quite satisfied with low winter live weight gains. And for big bulls, that might be 0 to 0.2 of a kilogram a day. For little bulls, it might be 0.2 to 0.3. And again, you'll work that out for yourself in your own system. Yeah. Right. So what else can I say here? Oh, stocking rate. Ben, if I missed something, I'm just going to move on to stocking rate.
Might be worth just touching on just the centre pivots around the country. Like there's a fair bit of irrigation and just that explosive feed supply that sort of happens from September until December, and that strategy of deferred grazing. I mean, how long does something have to be deferred for, Bob, to get some value out of it?
What we're trying to do is to put it in that gap when we're trying to make cover as we come through to the 1st of May. And so as I said, we'd probably defer up to 20% of our system area, so we can just knock some cells off representing that percentage. And then we bring that back in to feed as we're building cover leading up to the 1st of May, so that all that growth can actually go into cover. And we're just going in we've got big covers from deferred grazing. We might be dealing with 4 tonne of pre-graze. And again, it's not stuff that's going to make them grow, but it's still warm and they can still do quite nicely. So it sort of opens up another topic area around your target live weights. And can we come back to those? And perhaps, or should we talk about that now?
No, I think you could park that and then come back to it. It will depend on whether it's a fast track or a slow track.
Yeah, that's a couple of things in the air there. So we'll come back and cover that all. So when we're talking about stocking rate, we tend to talk about kilograms of live weight per hectare at the 1st of May. And we're sort of tending to, we need a reference point. And I'm guessing being that, well, I think I'm not, well, from our cold winter situation on the Central Plateau, we would say winter starts on the 1st of May. From that point, we go down to single-digit pasture growth rate, and we need to have our plan well and truly in place and organised at that point for us to successfully get through the winter. So when we talk about stocking rate, rather than talk about numbers per hectare or stock units or anything like that, we talk live weight per hectare. And so my personal view is, and you know, this is a discussion point, but you wouldn't want to set up a system less than 800 kilos of live weight per hectare. And if you're not growing enough grass to cover that, we'll make sure you do. And in round numbers, 8 tonne of annual dry matter will cover 800 kilos. 900 kilos of live weight per hectare, you need about 9 tonne, and so it goes. What I'm saying is stocking rate is directly related to how much pasture you grow. The more you grow, the higher your stocking rate. I mean, it's obvious stuff, but a rough and ready indicator is that if you're growing 10 tonne of dry matter, you're likely to have a 1st of May live weight of 1,000 kilos. Now, this can be represented in R2 bulls or R1 bulls. So, you know, bulls around 200 kilos or 400 kilos, round numbers. And you work your system up from there. So I'm talking principles tonight. So we're not going to get down to the nitty gritty, but what you do, with the nitty gritty stuff, you do that for your own farm and you calculate a program specific to your own situation. So the broad principles are what I'm going to be covering right now. So Ben mentioned that you'll have a different approach to this if you have a 1 winter bull system or beef system compared to a 2 winter. So again, the round numbers are you got to go into winter with much bigger per animal live weight on a 1 winter system than you do 2. And the round numbers again, if you're going on a 1 winter system on the 1st of May, you want to have your cattle at 250 kilos live weight, round numbers. And if you're going on a 2 winter system, it's going to be more like 200 kilos. So we can see straight away that we're going to have 4 little bulls per hectare at 200 kilos to achieve the 800 kilo, or 5 on 1,000. So you can see that maybe quite high stocking rates relative to what you may have been used to. And this is one of the powerful things about beef systemisation. Because again, I want to make the point, as we're using all of the things that we know about pasture agronomy, animal physiology, all those sorts of things, we're splicing in to the beef system. Those 3 big S's I talked about are all spliced in and taken advantage of within the beef system. You've got a great deal of control. And I just add in the middle of this, from 50 years of working on farms and looking at systems and ways in which farmers can make more money, I would have to say that beef systemisation is the best by far. I have not been involved in a farm where we've not doubled production and profit. There's no doubt there'll be a situation where maybe that won't happen, but on all of the farms, and there's been many of them, where we've put systems in place, we've at least doubled and sometimes trebled production and profit. It's probably one of the biggest opportunities we have in sheep and beef farming. So Ben, would you endorse that?
Yeah, I'll definitely, absolutely, definitely support that notion. And it largely just comes back to, you know, it's sometimes not about how much land you have, it's about what you do with your land, isn't it? Yeah. So, and your fixed costs are the same when you're farming. So it's actually about trying to maximise your revenue per hectare, because every hectare you've largely got costs that you have to cover. So
yeah. I have a very good story about a situation up north going back a long number of years ago. A farmer, he was farming on the west coast up in Northland, and he knew he felt that he needed to buy another farm. Many of his neighbours were. He needed to increase his scale and size. And so the next door neighbour farm came up for sale, and of course you always have a go at it, don't you? He did the sums, went to the bank, and the bank said, no, I'm sorry, we can't borrow you the money, you're not earning enough. He came to one of our field days on beef systemisation, went home and applied it on his farm, and I'm quoting him now, and he said, I went to that field, I come home, I put the systems in place, and now I don't have to buy the farm next door. I'm quite happy, thank you very much. In other words, that increase in profit was more than what he would achieve by buying the farm and farming conventionally on both of those farms. A little plug there. So I guess the other thing to mention, Ben, is that we tend to talk a lot about bulls with systems. And I guess the systems were born with bulls because we had to think about how we could farm them in smaller mobs. We couldn't farm them in 100 or 200 or whatever, we felt. And so we got into this thing, well, how do we do that? And I'd say the father of beef systemisation is a guy by the name of Harry Ware at Bulls. And I won't go into him and into all of that, but he started a lot of the beef systemisation off. He's the father of techno. And, he's an amazing person, amazing farmer. And I just want to acknowledge him in passing. But I'll make the point that beef systemisation can be applied to bulls, heifers or steers. Doesn't matter, you can apply it. It just happens that when we do our gross margin analysis, we're going to make more money from bulls for all those obvious reasons. I'm not going to mention dairy grazing because they are giving bull farming a bit of a nudge in terms of profit, but I would like to suggest that it's not really suited to dairy grazing. That's an opinion. I could be proven wrong on this, but because we actually so much required to get that live weight gain on those heifers over winter to achieve the targets, it's a little more challenging. And so we can't actually run them at the stocking rate. So the higher our winter live weight gain, the lower our stocking must be to achieve the animal intake required to meet the live weight gain targets. And so a key part of this is trying to match feed demand against feed supply and trying to get that feed demand as low as we can over winter. And that's why it doesn't apply as nicely with dairy grazers and perhaps a little less so with finishing steers and heifers. We were trying to maintain quite a lot of conditions over those cattle over the winter. Having said that, there are people quite happily farming and finishing steers and heifers in systems. Look, I guess the cool thing about putting a system in for heifers and steers is that you can increase the mob size. I'll tell you a quick story with bulls. We'd got into the habit of thinking that with big bulls, so going into the winter around 400 kilos, the rising 2-year-old bulls, we tended to think that 30 was the upper limit in a mob. I was challenged by one of my clients, in fact, the Central Plateau client, saying, don't tell me to run my bulls at mobs of 30. I've got 8,500 of them. And Sam said to me, we need bigger mobs. Long story short, we got to 60 bulls in a mob. But we split the bulls in the spring into 2, thereby getting them back to 30, because that is when the challenge with mob size comes into effect as bulls start to neck up and what have you, and start to get a little stroppy as we come into the spring. So that's how we cope with that. So, but with steers and heifers, we can run them in mobs of 100, even 200. Which is to scale up our system size. So we might have a 10 hectare system for bulls, which we would turn into a 20 hectare or 30 hectare system. Same number of cells, same rotation, length, and those sorts of things. Applying the same principles, but just upsizing it to cope with the larger mobs. So we've just brushed through gross margins, and the purpose of tonight is not to dig into that. I think what we would encourage you to do is do your own policy analysis for your farm in terms of what's best suited to you with your goals, your likes and your dislikes, all those sorts of things, and then work out what policy will best suit your farm. Likewise with the size of bull. So, I think of one farming couple. They rang me up and said, could you come out because these big bulls are wrecking my farm? And they sure were. And when we did the calculation, it was roughly the same amount of area that was suitable to big bulls and little bulls. So the soil erosion disturbance from big bulls on the steeper land was causing a heck of a lot of sediment runoff, and it wasn't smart farming. In fact, it was dumb farming. And so we got the little bulls onto the steep stuff, the big bulls onto the easier stuff. Perfect solution, and met the environmental plan standards. So it's really nice too, I think, to underpin your beef systems with a solid land and environment plan. So you know what your soils are. You can say, I already know that, but describe them with your land use capability and establish your land management units. I think that's a very cool way to provide a foundation to your approach to beef systemisation. So that's really the big intro. We've spent a best part of 30 minutes talking that through. So perhaps we could start. Is there something you'd like to add, Ben? Or should we go and look at some of the questions?
I'm happy to have a look at some of the questions, but yeah, but probably just, in a practical sense around that wintering number thing. I think that's something that a lot of farmers that are getting into beef systemisation struggle with, in terms of, having to think of wintering mobs of 60 odd bulls. Like there's a lot of mobs obviously to shift. Is there a practical element to this, Bob? Can we lift those mobs any higher, or what's the antagonism with lifting numbers, wintering numbers with bulls?
I think it's that behaviour thing. I mean, I think, Ben, we need to say to our farmers that are with us tonight, we don't know everything. We've still got stuff to learn. I just confess to House having raised the number of big bulls in a mob from 30 to 60. We actually doubled it, and likewise with the little bulls going into winter around 200 kilos. And we'd sort of got into this idea, almost like a recipe, that this is the recipe to beef systemisation. Now, Sam broke those rules by challenging that number, and so we got to 60 big bulls, splitting them in the spring for behavioural reasons, and likewise with the little bulls, the same deal. But is there any way around that? Maybe collars. Doesn't change behaviour, but you can ship them more frequently. There's some advantages in and around that. I guess we'll talk about collars. It may come up as a question, but yeah, unless you've come up with something different and better, not too many ways around it, really. I think shift frequency is a big thing. I think the three things that sit within the beef systemisation is mob size, shift frequency, and rotation length. Rotation length you can calculate. Shift frequency is in your control. Obviously, the more often you shift them, the more labour goes in. There'll be some that want to stretch that out. But let's remember, we're dealing with a situation where if you have them for long periods in a paddock, like I know one bull farmer that has them up to 6 days in a break over winter, I don't think that's satisfactory for a couple of reasons. One is from an animal perspective. What tends to happen when you've got cattle on maintenance, they'll eat most all of that grass on day one, and therefore they're living on scenery for the rest of that period of 6 days. The other thing about it, and I think a really important part of it too, is pasture growth, regrowth. So what's happening is that if you've been on a break grazing cattle, at any stage you'll notice that the pasture jumps up behind you quite quickly, especially up in these northern zones, perhaps not so much down where you are. But what happens for those first blades of grass to get up, the plant has gone back to its root reserves to get them up, those solar panels. Once the solar panels get up, now the energy is taken from the sun. It's that simple. And so the more often you ask the plant to go back to its root reserves to get those leaves up, you're going to be depleting the soil, the plant root structure. You're going to be diminishing it just through that process. And it's nothing more complicated than that, is it, Ben? That's it in a nutshell. And so we're relying on this solar panel effect You don't have to put solar panels on your farm. You don't have to go and buy those solar panels. I'm being silly now, but the solar panel is your pasture, and what you're trying to do is to get that pasture cover up, so you optimise that. We're not going to talk about 2-3 leaf stage tonight. Another technical matter, something you would talk about in a focus group. You would get to understand more about how ryegrass grows. 1, 2, 3 leaf fades and daughter tillers and etc., all a subject for another day. Yes?
Just in practical terms, I mean, it may not be right. We're all learning, but we try to avoid bulls being in a cell for longer than 3 days, because otherwise you do observe them going back and getting that regrowth. So
that's right. Yeah. So I think that's a maximum is 3 days. I have quite a few clients that, they have weekends and they've got kids to think about with sport and stuff like that, and they'll shift Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And I think that's pretty good. It ends up a 2.3 shift frequency, 2.3 day shift frequency. So you get a little bit longer rotation with the same number of cells. And what they tend to do is ship them on Friday afternoon and again on Monday morning. So they sort of cut that down to 2.5 rather than 3 days, and add a half a day on to the other shifts each side of it. So that works. And there's all sorts of things you can do, smart things you can do to meet whatever your situation is. You could shift Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. There's all of those sorts of things, or you could just stick to a 2-day shift. And what happens, on those of you that are on pug-prone soils, perhaps the thing to mention, Ben, is that you are sort of thinking, I need to shift them on because they're making a bit of a mess. So the first point I'd make is you can't spend your time more wisely in the winter than shifting livestock. There's serious lolly in being out there and shifting them. And so instead of going to say if you're on a 2-day shift, you might cut the break in half, because the thing that does real damage to your soils is pugging over time. So if you can reduce the time factor, that's in your control. So you can halve the break in front. You think, sugar, they're going to be more intensive. Yes, they are, but you're going to shift them every day during that wet period, and that works. Yes, you'll still do some damage, of course, but you haven't got the pugging over time. You've just got that short boom, 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 boom.
Have you got anything to add, Bob, around water? Because I know that's something that, particularly with bulls, if you're going to get into beef systemisation, they'll knock bullcocks off traditional troughs very quickly.
Well, I'd be interested to hear what you've done, Ben, but we've got some of our guys up here have got, like, say, 10 cell systems rather than your 20 down there, because our rotation lengths are half of yours, right? So we can have 10 cells rather than 20 cells, and we cut them in 4 just the same. And we end up with an 80-day rotation, 20 cells, cut in 4, 40, 2 days per cell, 80 days. What are we trying to say here?
Should we be using, micro troughs or
so they'll put a concrete trough in the middle of that, in that cell. Yeah. And they put the wires across the top. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. And so now this is where you get your 4 from. So they've got a quarter of that trough. Imagine a concrete sheet trough, for example. And others will just use the micro troughs. And that is a really cool, again, it's a Kiwi Tech invention. So these are the sorts of things you can explore. Micro troughs are great. I don't know what your experiences with them is. One of the things I would say, don't get caught into this trap of having troughs that you shift. You'll get sick of that in quick time. Make sure you got the trough, and we're required to have water in every cell, but that's another discussion point. When something you'd be workouts, in a particular situation, you would address that. But water is essential, and so you do need a good water source. And in the summer, they are sucking up a fair bit of water at the stocking rates I'm talking about. So that needs to be designed properly. But micro troughs, what are they, $35 each? I think the last time I looked. And, I've seen bulls lined up drinking out of those. And only one bull can drink at a time. And again,
I'm going to touch on what you've learnt with troughs, Ben.
Yeah, I think probably the key learning for us down here, Bob's been we had some micro troughs set up, but in the summer obviously it gets really hot, and when we
Yeah.
had the lines exposed above the ground, the pipes were heating up. I
Yeah.
don't know if it's a North Island challenge
Yes,
as well.
it does up here too. Yep.
Yeah. So we're getting boiling water coming out of some of the troughs. So if you are going to put micro troughs in, bury the lateral. And yeah, if that doesn't work, then you can always do the 100-litre reservoirs and drag it around. But as you say, you do get a bit sick of
Get sick of that
shifting
after a while.
troughs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm hearing what you're saying, but having said that, many of the farmers have just stuck to the water lines on top, and the bulls seem to sort it out for themselves. So they'll be drinking more at night and early morning rather than when it's really hot during the day. I mean, they're getting water. That's the point. So, questions, Nicola?
I think we've touched on the systemisation, bulls, steers, heifers. A question from Matt: should stocking rate be driven by minimum growth over winter or peak growth over spring?
I think it's over winter. That's where you determine that from, and your capacity to build that cover. That's why we talked about cover. It's like a feed reserve, a bit like hay in the barn. And so you're calculating your winter based on utilising that pasture cover. So you're mining that over winter, and you do have some pasture growth, albeit low, but you're calculating that in too. So you model that, and it's a relatively simple calculation. So what you're trying to do is to get through to where feed demand will be matching feed supply. We'll put it around the other way. Feed supply will match feed demand, and you can do a feed budget on that. Relatively easy to work through. And that calculation, as I say, has taught us that in a South Island situation, you're likely to need a 160-day winter rotation. You may not completely get to the 160-day mark. You might start speeding up before. As I said before, when you get through to September, you're starting to think about when am I going to speed up? Yeah. So as soon as you start speeding up, you've got a bigger land area that you're presenting to your animals, and you're doing your calculations from there. Does that make
another
sense?
one, yeah, no, that was good. Thanks, Bob. Another one on internal parasite management. Do you want to go into that a little bit? Is there a build-up of parasites in these systems? Asks Glenn.
Yes. And I can confess to being involved in a situation where we had a disaster, and it was on the Central Plateau. And what happened, what we learned from that was that when bulls are growing, little bulls are growing, we're particularly talking about the 100 to 200 kilo bull. Yes. I mean, you can avoid this by buying a 200 kilo bull. But if you're farming bulls from 100 to 200 kilos, you're in a phase where the bull has not yet built up its immunity to internal parasite challenge, right? And so you're going to have a plan. And it's very important to have a plan, because in the Central Plateau situation, we had a very rare event, which was a summer drought. The summer drought meant that the bulls fell off their live weight gain, and as a result, they lost a lot of their immunity. And it was a disaster. We lost a lot of bulls and went from a situation where we were making a lot of money to a situation where we're not making much at all. It's almost overnight. It's devastating. And so you must have a very good animal health plan. And in an ideal situation, you would not bring those 100 kilo bulls onto your bull platform over that summer period. You wouldn't bring them in until they're closer to a year of age. But in practice, it tends to be in May, when they're more like 10 months of age. But you know, they don't just suddenly at 12 months of age have immunity. They're building this as they're going along. With me so far? Good. Now, so we have to think about our summer management of little bulls. The solution on the Central Plateau was to have them on lucerne, and it worked extremely, but it worked exceptionally well. And so as those bulls came up toward the 200 kilos, they would then transfer into the bull unit, but that wouldn't be happening until April. Some in March, the early ones, and then than April. So now these bulls have built up a little immunity. And the other really important thing in that, of course, you need to go to a worm-wise workshop to fully understand about, and Beef and Lamb run those, and they're blooming good value. So if you haven't been to one of those, I encourage you to do so, because you'll learn about this stuff. And of course, we shouldn't be routinely drenching as we were at that time on the Central Plateau, 28 days. It was almost you'd get sacked if you didn't have those bulls around and poking a drench into them every 28 days. But now the program is that if a bull's not gaining at a certain level, they will be treated. And so therefore your refugia is a mix of bulls that have been dosed, drenched, and those that haven't. And so again, I encourage you to go to a Beef and Lamb worm-wise workshop. And some of those now are extending out to advanced worm-wise workshops where you're talking about integrated parasite management as well as just the principles of managing internal parasites.
Oh,
Does that answer that?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Bob. Labour requirements of these systems, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah,
that's
a really interesting one. So,
yeah,
the different ones say, well, there's a lot of labour associated with shifting cattle. I just made the point before, I think it's worth it. You could not spend your time more wisely over winter, I don't think. Maybe somebody on our audience will chip me on that. I'm not certain, but I do really believe that they're so productive that it's worthwhile putting the effort in. Having said that, on the Central Plateau, block manager would be running 1,200 bulls, 50-50 little and big bulls. So that's quite a lot of stock units if you think about it, yes? And Ben might like to comment because he's a practitioner as well.
I mean, I wouldn't like to put an hourly rate on it, but if you're out shifting bulls, you're probably earning $300-400 an hour. And I don't know if you'd support that, Bob, or not, but there's the return on your time probably couldn't be better. And to shift cattle actually doesn't take a whole lot of time if you've got the right system set up. You're just dropping a wire and letting them walk over. So I think it's a pretty good use of time.
And you're not burning diesel feeding out and stuff like that. That can be pretty time savage as well. So I don't know. I think that's something you need to work out for yourself, but you can handle a hell of a lot of bulls. And the thing is also that you don't have to be a rocket scientist to shift them. So you can utilize people that maybe haven't got a lot of experience. Having said that, of course, when you're shifting, you're looking at your cattle, and that's an important part of the whole job. When I was coaching the kids, as I called them, up on the Central Plateau, looking after, and quite a few of them are young, hence me, old fellow like me, calling them kids. These are people that haven't had a lot of experience. One of the things I would say, though, it could become very. So what people are encouraged to do is to not just shift bulls, and I mean, you farmers will be telling your staff this anyway. I mean, you're not just shifting sheep or cattle from one paddock to another, you're actually looking at them as well and checking them as they run through the gate, in this case as they walk over the wire. So you're checking on stuff like that. And the other thing you can do is get them doing feed calculations. So what is the feed demand? Pretty easy to calculate. So what's the system size? What's the rotation length? Okay, so you divide that in. This is the area in square metres that you're affording the mob a day. Then you say, what's the pre-graze? What's the post-graze? Okay, you multiply that by that, and that is the feed allowance to the mob. Divide the mob number in, and that's the feed allowance per head. It's so easy to do, and it makes it interesting. And the job that each person has looking after systems like this is each system is actually a farm. You can think of it like this. We call them farmlets often, but if you think about each system as a farm, what we're trying to do is optimize the performance in it. So you get your staff thinking about, can I add another animal into this system? Or have I got too many? Do I need to take one out? And so you can start thinking like that. So it's not just shifting cattle, it's thinking about how am I farming this farm or farmlet. But it can be and it's a great way to teach people about how to farm. And you've got them under the microscope. as you get used to it, you can just walk out, look at it, and know whether the system's working or not. It is so cool because it's all laid out in front of you. Does that, Ben, does that
Yeah, I mean, it's
relate to
just
that
back to
kind
basics, isn't it? And I think, we can overcomplicate some of this stuff, but you're
of?
right.
It's simple.
You just got to keep an eye on your pre-graze covers and your
That's it.
post. And if your pre-grazes are creeping up, then in the
Yeah,
spring you knock those
that's
areas,
it.
defer them.
Mm.
Yeah.
Exactly, and you're watching a post growth too, because that's telling you are really if you start to leave more behind, well, these animals are getting up to a maximum capacity. And they start getting over 1,500, for example. It's a very cool system, and there's a lot of levers you can pull to make the boat go faster. So you're thinking the whole time, especially you come into spring. It's a very interesting time. When do I speed up? How fast do I go? And so because what you're trying to do is maximize the number of growth days on the animal. And did we mention compensatory growth? Because this is one of the things that happen when you have animals on low live weight gains over winter, they compensate in the spring. And so and there's been enough work done on this for us to confidently say to you, science, that this is a real compensatory growth is a real thing. And you take advantage of it in these systems. So you make up a lot of that live weight gain lost over winter. You catch up in the spring, called compensatory growth.
A question here, Bob, on wintering costs from Debbie. So they have R1 bulls on fodder beat, crops and mobs of 100 over winter, and then in the spring when they come off, they split into mobs and then they're rotated around paddocks from October through to May. Then they're processed in June as R2. So is winter grazing on grass more cost effective than winter crop?
Well, Ben's probably better to answer it, but I think the short answer is yes. However, again, you need to look at each individual system and do your own arithmetic. But Ben, I know you've had experience with fodder beet and also pasture, so I think probably Ben is better to answer this question.
Yeah, it's a good one to put me on the spot with, because it's it's cropping's a bit of a life hack, if you like. You put your crop in and then how much feed you got for winter, and then you work out your winter stocking rate. But I think the caveat to that is that it comes with a cost. And I think, when you start cropping to carry your animals through, you're probably starting to get above, I don't know, $300-400 per head in terms of your costs for wintering those R1s. So probably our main learning, we were doing fodder beet there for a couple of years. Now we're doing a bit of kale as a pressure release valve. Not saying it's the wrong or right thing, but the more you can maximize grass, given its cost effectiveness, the better you are. But it does mean that you just need to be quite well planned in the autumn to build those covers for winter. And it depends on whether you're doing that fast track system, trying to finish those yearling bulls before their second winter, or if you're trying to carry those big fellas through that second winter, just around how you tackle that. And I think every farm will be different, but I wouldn't say cropping's the wrong thing or the right thing. It's just, if you can manage your pasture, there's a significant cost benefit to doing that. I don't know, Bob, what would your experience be?
Very much so, but of course, most of my experience is in a North Island context, so I'm very quick to mention that. But all of the arithmetic tells you that is the case, but careful planning to get that autumn cover is the key. And so I think trying to make hay and silage in a system is problematic for the reasons that you've got fences everywhere. And so if you had your whole farm in systems, it is challenging. But if you haven't, there'll be places on your farm where you'll have a surplus. If you can make that early, and therefore get good quality silage, for example, and have that as a bit of a war chest, that's something you can use in the autumn to build covers. Yes. And so, I think you'd be thinking, but this is the situation at on the Central Plateau. That's what happens there. They make the silage outside of the bull systems themselves, and they have what they call a war chest of silage, which is available to them if they have a lousy autumn, they can step in with that and build their covers that way. Or if they have a snow event and they get maybe one of those, sometimes two, over a winter, they can intervene again by putting silage into the systems. Yeah.
Something that might be worth exploring a bit further too in a Otago context is we do find it hard to grow grass in the autumn, so autumn nitrogen just to try and build some cover for winter.
Yeah. And so if you do the calculations, you say, return on investment's not that great. But if you compare feed grown from nitrogen relative to buying supplements, it's still the cheapest supplement in town. So, just being aware of those sorts of tools that you can have in your toolboxes, I think, is smart. One of the things perhaps you guys are probably jumping ahead a little bit, but we encourage any of you that are interested in this, perhaps think about forming a focus group. Beef and Lamb is supporting those. And if you're in a cluster and you're all dealing with the same sorts of things, you can start sharing your experiences, and then, but also be supported with people that have some knowledge in the space. Yes. So a suggestion to be thinking about. Perhaps we can come back onto that as we summarise at the end of this podcast.
Cool, thanks, Bob. I've got another question here, just around the limits for where these systems can actually be operated. So do these systems need high quality pasture, or can this be run effectively on steeper, rougher native pastures? Like, what are the limits?
So, and we can run them on rougher pasture. And it's probably the best pasture improvement program you could have. Again, Ben might chime in on this because he's got obviously a lot more South Island experience. But there's somebody that is that I've asked them if you could mention him. Matt Tayler up at Garston has had a crack at, and he did this thing about let's trial it on some pretty ordinary pasture. And like the quality of that pasture was pretty ordinary. Like there's native stuff in there and brown top and all sorts of stuff. But he got that volume of feed up going into winter. And I think if Matt was on the show tonight, he'd been saying, I'm convinced the system thing works and it can work on pretty ordinary country. So he's growing and developing systems on his farm, and he'll be looking at putting in on some better stuff as well under pivot. And he's been down to see Ben to have a look at that. But so the short answer is you can do the arithmetic and you can be on some pretty ordinary country, and the improvement you see, as Matt's observed, is amazing. It's actually a pasture development tool. And so it might sound extreme. So Ben, it'd be useful if you could comment. I
can probably only speak to the experience that we've had here recently, but our experience would be your pastures only improve when you start rotationally grazing them and spelling them for the right length of time. Just making sure your fertility's, well looked after, but as soon as you start rotating and spelling those pastures, they just get better and better with time. And I wouldn't say you need to go through an intensive pasture renewal cycle to get the benefits out of beef systemisation. You'll get the benefits regardless, I would say, as soon as you start putting fences up.
That's quite a thing for you to say as an agronomist, Ben, I've got to say.
Well, it's the experience that we've had.
It's just experience, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. We've actually got Matt online. Matt, do you want to make a comment if you turn your audio on?
I'm trying to think when Bob come down, was that about 3 years ago, and he challenged us that if we did the back fencing that would grow, these are flats that are growing around about 3 or 4 tonne if you're lucky, with a lot of red fescue, brown top, that if we did a bit of break fencing and threw grazing on them, would grow 20% more, which we've well and truly seen. Those flats are probably growing a bit over 4 or 5 tonne now. But even just this is the second winter into it, and we've never put cockswood or ryegrass in there, and now you're seeing that waxy leaf shoot up after that third day when you shift them on after the third day. So I'm trying to think of the other example you gave me, Bob. Was it Neil up north? A lot of that stuff in the North Island is on, they don't renew pasture, and yet they're still growing 8, 9, 10 tonne in technical systems just because they've grazed it properly from stuff that used to grow 5 or 6. So,
that's right.
Once you, look, so give it a crack, and you'll get sold on it pretty quick. It's pretty hard not to see. Well, even if you farm beside a dairy farmer, the dairy farmers have their pasture management really down pat. Like, we've got a sheep farm beside a dairy farm, and we kind of look over the fence, wonder why they grow 30 or 40% more than what we do. But that's because they haven't got bloody sheep that they set stock in spring. And basically it's just a beef systemisation, isn't it, on a dairy farm?
That's correct.
And just further to these pasture improvements, just a question here. Do you think is that rotation only, or are you doing regrassing as part of your system?
No. Sorry, that's a question for you, Matt.
Oh, no. Yeah, so to be fair, we've probably bastardised Bob's system a little bit. So we kind of use the bulls over winter to really get the thatch out and set up it for the legume for the sheep in the spring. So the benefit we're really seeing is that we're getting more ryegrass and cockswood coming through, but we're also getting a lot of white and a little bit of sub coming through too, white clover. So the next step, we've really just got, if we kept cattle on that the whole 12 months, I think we'd really see a real pasture renovation happening. But as I say, we're kind of cocking the system up a bit because we're still set stocking sheep in there in the spring. Yeah.
And what about you, Ben? Any regrassing in your system?
Traditionally, yeah. So we've got a mix of some new pastures and some older pastures. The new pastures are definitely slightly more productive in the first 18 to 24 months in terms of the speed of growth and the total dry matter production, but probably after that 24-month period they start to normalize back to what some of the other older pastures are. But the one thing I would say about the new pastures, especially coming out of intensive cropping like fodder beet or heavy kale crop, is that they can pug a lot easier. So if you've got those high stocking rates that you're trying to winter on, because the ground is probably more just more fragile given it's had a cropping phase, you just got to be a bit more careful around minimizing your winter pugging on those areas. But I'd definitely say that our experience has been just that some of those older pastures, as soon as you start rotationally grazing them, they're extremely productive.
And do you think the deferred grazing helps with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you get a big seed set, it just comes back like hair on a cat's back. So it is arguably quite a strategic renewal tool just to defer different areas every year if you're worried about some areas that are getting a bit run out. Bob, you might want to comment on your experiences as well with what you've seen with deferred.
The thing is, it works really well when you've got good pasture because you get good pasture reset. But if you've got crap pasture, obviously you're seeding back. But as you build up the quality of pasture, then you get better reseeds. So, back in the day when we first looked at deferred grazing, the rules were that you would actually defer graze your best paddocks, which seems all back to front. But the rationale around that is you're reseeding good pasture rather than rubbish pasture. So but I think as Matt's indicated, you've got this cumulative effect occurring as each time you have another go, you get some improvement and you're building and growing that pasture quality as time goes on. Of course, what we're trying to do is get that nitrogen cycle going, and it's just perfect for that. The spread of dung and urine is just even across that area, and there's so much positive about it. It's amazing.
Might just quick for a couple more questions, and we'll have to wrap up. I'm just mindful of the time here. Another quick question about Matt's comments regarding sheep following infrastructure needed to run cattle and sheep in the same systems. What are you doing, Matt?
Polywire is pretty simple, and then you just 200 metres of bloody alkathene on a 100 litre reservoir trough. So I've kind of done the math. I can't make collars work where we can put polywire up, but so that's just us. Again, the labour thing, we like to go and check the bloody bulls each couple of 3 days just to make sure we're getting a pre and post graze residuals right, which is kind of where I'm a little bit hesitant around the collars, but so look, once you get into a system, we can set up so this is all uncultivated stuff. We're on kind of in about 20 to 40 hectare blocks. If we go out and once a fortnight, we'll spend a couple of hours setting up the next 7 breaks in front of us, and then you're done for the fortnight. It's pretty simple. So just lots of polywire and temporary troughs.
Cool. Bob, do you want to make any quick comments on wearables, given that we're covering them next week?
Just do your arithmetic. I think Matt pretty well summed it up. So what we're talking about is cost and benefit. So we can quickly calculate the cost from using collars. Now you need to think about where you're going to gain the benefit. And there'll be situations where you can. And I think Matt's even got some ideas about that himself. But there's a cost, and so you need now to think about where your benefits are going to come from. So keep an open mind, as we all need to keep an open mind to collars, and clearly they're going to be breakthrough for many. Some, it may be that they actually get to beef systemised where they wouldn't otherwise. So the big uplift you get from beef systemisation, that's where the money is. It's just that if you put collars on, you've got an extra cost. So you just need to think about where you're going to get that return. That would be my quick response to that.
Cool. Thanks, Bob. And just a quick last one from Chris. In a summer dry area, it's too risky to rely on getting autumn growth, so crop gives reliability to the system. However, is it still more profitable overall to buy in animals during the winter, early spring when covers have come up?
Generally not. Our experience is that you don't make much money when you're buying cattle on a spring market. So you sort of need to think about trying to buy them outside of that. And so as you're coming into winter, now again, you've got to do your arithmetic and do your sums in around your own situation. And it's challenging at the moment because beef prices are way up there. And it's tending to savage some of the margins, but in simple terms, when we're talking about cattle farming, we need to think about per hectare return, and the two core things there are numbers per hectare and margin per head. And so, you've got to really work on your cattle margins, and the systems allow you to put the numbers per hectare on. There's not a better way of being able to do that, to carry livestock. So now you just got to concentrate on your margins. And so buying cattle as you come into spring generally, in my experience, is not a great option. What we need to be thinking about is how we can get as many cattle across winter as possible. Now, if you've got tough summers, well, obviously, your sales program is going to be wrapped around that. You're going to have earlier sales, right? Yes. And so, but you're likely still to have a surplus. And so putting that surplus into something that you can use to help build up covers, along with maybe a bit of nitrogen, is the way to go. Cover is king. I just want to perhaps leave it on that note. When we're talking about beef systemisation, cover is king. And I'm talking about that 1st of May cover. That's what gets you through a winter.
Perfect. Thanks heaps for that, Bob. Big thanks. Sorry.
Comment. I'm just thinking that there's quite a few people have come on the session tonight, and it's sort of like where to from here. Are we going to cover that? May I just touch on that?
Jump in there, Bob.
So I just want to encourage you, just like Matt's done, just try a little bit on your farm. Put 1 or 2 systems in. And you can reference back to Nicola here to get some support, and Dean is with us on the podcast as well from Beef and Lamb. Beef and Lamb are really supportive of this, and so if you can indicate your interest in doing it, you can get some support. And I think the hope is that maybe there'll be a focus group that's developed, and when you get into a group like that and you can get a bit of support, it's a great way to get into something like this. So I would really encourage you with that. Give it a go. You don't have to commit your whole farm, just a couple of systems. And if you can do that with some support as well, well, that'd be ultra good. There's stuff for us to learn with this, clearly in the Central Otago setting. We've got much more to learn. And a great way to do that is being in one of those focus groups.
Yeah, cool. No, that's excellent, Bob. So you can contact myself or Dean, or you can just fire a message through on the Central Otago Farming for Profit Facebook page. And we'll go from there. But I just wanted to wrap up now. Big thanks to Bob and to Ben and also Matt for joining us. I think this has been a really valuable session. I think you've managed to pack a lot into the last hour. So I really appreciate you giving your time to speak to us and for sharing your knowledge and expertise and insights. It's been really valuable. And I know for those joining us, there's a lot to take in. We have recorded tonight's webinar, so we'll make that available for later viewing. We can email that out to those that have registered, and I'll also put it on our Farming for Profit Facebook page. That's the Central Otago one, so you'll be able to find it there in the future. I'll also post up there's a host of great resources on this stuff. So I'll also post up some of those resources over the next week or so, so just keep an eye out for those. Next week we're going to be talking wearable tech, and we're going to have Jamie Weghorn from Gallagher and Mark Craig from Halter on. So we're going to delve a bit further into how those technologies work, do a bit of a compare and contrast, and look at current and future potential applications. So that should be a good session. If you haven't already, make sure you've got your registrations in for that. But other than that, that's all from me. Thanks everyone for attending, and thanks to our speakers. We'll see you all next week.